The recording lasted 41 minutes. It was found inside a small black box drifting near the ash cloud that used to be Heaven Colony. The box was scorched on 3 sides. Its signal was weak. It took a recovery drone 6 days to locate it, and another 2 days to crack the encryption. When the audio finally played inside the secured briefing room on Earth, no one spoke for a long time after it ended. The voice on the recording belonged to a woman named Ji-yoon. She was the colonial administrator of Heaven, a quiet, careful woman who had spent 8 years helping build the colony from a dust field into a real home for over 4 million people. She had schools on her registry, hospitals, a small university that had just opened its second building 2 months before the attack. When the Veil fleet arrived, Ji-yoon did not run. She did not try to broadcast a distress signal because she knew one would never arrive in time. Instead, she sat down at her desk, opened the colony's population record, and started reading names into a recorder. She read them in order street by street, building by building, her voice calm and flat and steady, even as the windows behind her glowed orange and the walls shook and the lights flickered and died. She read for 41 minutes. The recording ended mid-name. Admiral Di-hyun sat alone in the briefing room for a long time after the others left. She was not a woman who showed much on her face. She had commanded 3 deep space operations, had lost ships and crew, had written letters to families she would never meet. She knew what grief looked like when it wore a uniform. She had worn it herself. But this was something different. This was not a battle. There had been no warning, no declaration, no ultimatum. The Veil Dominion had simply decided that a human colony on the edge of their preferred expansion corridor was inconvenient, and they had removed it the way you remove a weed, without ceremony, without hesitation, and without any expectation of consequence. The message Ambassador Roshin sent to Earth Command afterward was brief. It compared humanity to livestock. It told them to stay inside their borders. It was written in the tone of someone who had never once imagined that the thing they were speaking to might write back. Di-hyun read it once. Then she folded it, put it in a drawer, and went to make a call that very few people on Earth knew she was authorized to make. The call connected to a facility that did not appear on any public map. The man on the other end looked like he had just woken up, which he had. He had been in cryosuspension for nearly 3 years, waiting. His name was Junho. He was not large or loud or impressive looking. He had a thin face, short hair going gray at the temples, and eyes that were very still and very dark. He looked at Di-hyun through the screen without surprise, as if he had been expecting her call since the moment he went under. She told him the number, 4.3 million. He was quiet for 4 seconds. Then he said, "Get me my crew." The United Earth Navy had built the ship in secret. She had no listing on any public naval registry, no press announcement, no name on any official document that could be accessed without the highest level of clearance. She existed in a category of her own, not a deterrent, not a peacekeeping vessel, not a diplomatic escort. She had been built for a single purpose that no one in any public office was willing to say out loud. She was the answer to a question humanity hoped it would never have to ask. And now the question had been asked, at a cost of 4.3 million lives, and the answer was already docked and waiting. Her name was No More Civility. Junho walked her full length on the first day and said nothing. She was not beautiful the way some ships were beautiful. She did not have clean lines or elegant proportions. She was dense and angular and dark, built without a single gram of wasted material, every surface either armored or armed or both. She looked, one engineer once said, like something that had decided to become a weapon and had committed to it completely. The crew came in over the next week. They were not recruited from the top of any graduation list. They were pulled from quiet postings and medical holds, and in 2 cases, from personal requests for indefinite leave that nobody had questioned, because nobody wanted to ask why. Samin arrived first. She was the weapons officer, and she had been one of 63 people to survive the heaving ground defense response. A response that had lasted approximately 4 minutes before the orbital fire made it irrelevant. She had escaped on a cargo hauler with 11 others, 8 of whom did not make it to the evacuation point. She had not filed a single complaint, had not requested counseling, had not spoken to any journalist or memorial committee or government panel. She had simply returned to duty, gone very quiet and waited. When the call came, she packed a single bag and was aboard before anyone else. Wuho came next. He was the chief engineer and the man who had designed the ship's primary weapon, a system called the Cradle Breaker Array, which 3 separate military review boards had described as either brilliant or catastrophic depending on which side of the firing line you were on. He was messy and talkative, and always had grease under his fingernails, and he was the only person aboard who seemed genuinely excited to be there, which everyone else found either comforting or unsettling. Key 1 was the navigator. She was 24 years old. Her mother and 2 younger brothers had been on Kalos 7. She had been off-world on a training rotation when the attack happened, and she had spent the following weeks in a kind of mechanical silence, eating, sleeping, running diagnostics, doing everything a person does without doing any of it with feeling. When she stepped aboard the asterisk No More Civility, she touched the hull once with the flat of her hand, very briefly, and then walked inside without looking back. Dr. Rena was the last to arrive. She was the ship's physician and also the foremost human expert on Veil biology, their nerve structures, their pressure points, their specific physiological responses to pain and fear. She had spent 12 years studying them under the banner of xenomedical research. She had never been asked to apply that knowledge in a military context before. She did not hesitate when she was asked now. Junho gathered them on the bridge the night before launch. He did not give a speech. He did not talk about duty or sacrifice or justice. He looked at each of them for a moment, and then he said quietly, "They think we're going to grieve. Let's go tell them what we actually do." The ship left the dock at 300 hours. No escort, no signal, no record in any system that would be reviewed for a very long time. The stars outside were cold and many, and the No More Civility moved into them like something that had been patient for long enough. The Veil Dominion had not fought a real war in over 200 years. This was not because they were peaceful. It was because no one had ever been stupid enough, or desperate enough, or angry enough to start one with them. They were large and old and very well armed, and they had spent centuries making sure every civilization within reach understood exactly what those 3 things meant when combined. They did not need to fight. They only needed to remind people, occasionally, that they could. The destruction of Heathen Colony had been a reminder, a small one in their estimation, a nudge, the kind of thing you do to a creature that has wandered too close, not out of malice but out of simple convenience. They had not expected a response. They had not prepared for one. Why would they? Humanity was barely 200 years into space travel. They had a handful of colonies, a modest navy, and a history of arguing with each other more than with anyone else. The Veil High Conclave reviewed the situation, noted that Earth Command had gone silent following the attack, and concluded that the matter was resolved. They were still concluding this when border station Velun disappeared. It happened at 3:14 hours station time. One moment Velun was there, 12,000 personnel, full defensive grid, patrol wings running standard rotations, the whole quiet machinery of a functioning military hub. The next moment, every sensor in the surrounding sector registered a single massive energy event, and then nothing. No debris field large enough to identify. No survivors. No distress signal because there had been no time to send one. The No More Civility was already gone before the nearest Veil patrol ship arrived to look at the empty space where Velun used to be. On the bridge, Salmon lowered her hands from the firing controls and looked at the readout for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned back to her console and began running a reset cycle on the Cradle Breaker Array. Her face was very still. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Junho stood at the center of the bridge, watching the data feed as Ki-1 plotted their next position. The jump had been clean. The exit point was deep in a debris field 2 systems over, invisible, cold, and quiet. He looked at the numbers on the display, and then he looked at Ki-1. She was already working on the next calculation. Her hands moved quickly. She did not look up. Wuho's voice came over the internal channel from engineering, bright, and a little too cheerful for the hour. Array is cycling, 22 minutes to full charge. Also, I found a small stress fracture in junction 9, completely unrelated to what we just did, and I am fixing it right now before anyone asks. Junho allowed himself a very small, very brief expression that was almost a smile. Then it was gone. The Veil response to Velun's destruction was exactly what Dr. Rena had predicted. She had briefed Junho 3 days into the voyage, standing at the front of the small crew room with a diagram of Veil neural architecture on the screen behind her, and a calm, precise manner that made everything she said sound like a fact that had always been true. She told him that the Veil were not wired for vulnerability. 600 years without a real threat had not made them careless. It had made them structurally incapable of processing the concept that something smaller than them might actually be dangerous. Their first instinct when faced with an attack they did not understand would not be caution. It would be to reach for the largest available response and apply it as fast as possible, because that had always worked before. She told him to use that. He had. The Veil dispatched a rapid response fleet to the Velun site, 40 warships, the kind of force that could flatten a small moon. They found nothing to fight. While they were there, the No More Civility hit a Veil military shipyard 2 systems in the opposite direction. The shipyard had been building 3 cruisers. All 3 were destroyed on the dock, along with the dock itself and the automated defense platforms surrounding it. The whole operation took 11 minutes. The 40-ship response fleet turned around and jumped toward the shipyard. They found nothing. By the time they arrived at the shipyard, Wu had already rebuilt the array's power coupling from scratch. Ki-1 had plotted 4 separate exit routes from their current position, and Salmon had selected the next target from the list they had built during the voyage. A fuel depot, then a communications relay array, then a forward command post that coordinated patrol schedules for 6 border sectors, then a weapons storage facility that the Veil had never bothered to heavily defend because no one had ever reached it before. Each strike was different. Each one hit something the Veil had not thought to prioritize. Junho had spent the 3-week voyage studying every piece of intelligence Earth Command had on Veil military infrastructure, not looking for the biggest targets, but for the most connected ones. He did not want to hurt them. He wanted to confuse them, exhaust them, make them turn in circles chasing a ship they could not find, responding to attacks that were already over by the time they heard about them. He wanted them afraid before they understood why. It was working. Inside the Veil High Conclave, the mood had shifted from irritation to something quieter and less comfortable. Ambassador Roshin, who had authored the livestock message with such easy confidence, now sat in closed sessions that ran past midnight, listening to military commanders argue about what was happening and why their standard responses were not stopping it. The words they kept using were the wrong ones: anomaly, isolated, temporary, manageable asterisk. They were still trying to fit what was happening into a shape they recognized. Rena had warned Junho about this too. She said the Veil would be the last ones to name what they were actually feeling, because they had no recent experience of it. She was right. On the 23rd day, a Veil scout ship briefly got a sensor reading on the asterisk No More Civility before she jumped. The reading lasted 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, the scout was able to record her hull configuration, her energy signature, and one other thing: the name printed on her side in plain block letters. The scout pilot filed his report. The report was read by 6 people before it reached the conclave. Each of those 6 people, independently, looked at the name for a long moment and then looked away, because there was something in the plainness of it that bothered them in a way they could not immediately explain. No more civility. It was not a threat. It was not a boast. It was a statement of fact, clean and simple, and without any room for misunderstanding. It said everything about the people who had sent the ship and nothing about fear, because people who were afraid did not name their weapons like that. By the time that report reached the top of the Conclave's review stack, the No More Civility had already moved again. She was deep in Veil space now, further than any human ship had ever gone, moving through the dark with the quiet, unhurried patience of something that had already decided how this was going to end. It was only beginning to understand what that meant. The Veil called it the Eternal Tide. 400 warships, the largest single military deployment the Dominion had made in 3 centuries. It stretched across the sensor grid like a wall, a slow, massive, deliberate wall that was moving through space with the confidence of something that had never once needed to hurry. Their formation was tight and layered. Shields overlapped. Firing arcs covered every approach vector. They had done the calculations, run the simulations, reviewed every piece of data they had on the human ship, and they had concluded with great certainty that 400 warships was not just enough, it was more than enough. It was a statement. It said, "We are not fighting you, we are ending you." The No More Civility detected them at long range and did not change course. Kiwon ran the numbers 3 times. She got the same answer all 3 times. She looked at Junho and reported the count in a flat, steady voice, the way she had learned to report things that were very large and very serious, without weight, without hesitation, just the fact placed cleanly in the air between them. Junho stood at the center of the bridge with his hands behind his back and looked at the display. The fleet filled the screen. He looked at it the way a person looks at weather, nodding it, measuring it, deciding what to wear. Salmon was already at her station. Her fingers moved across the controls slowly, checking each system in sequence, making sure everything was exactly where it needed to be. She had been awake for 19 hours. She did not look tired. She looked focused in the particular way that people who have lost a very great deal learn to look when the moment they have been waiting for finally arrives. Wuho's voice came from engineering. Array is at full charge. All secondary systems are green. I have also made coffee if anyone wants some, though I understand the timing is not ideal. Nobody answered him. He had not expected them to. He settled back into his seat and kept his eyes on the power readings. Dr. Rena was at her station near the back of the bridge. She was not a combat officer and had no weapons to manage, but Junho had asked her to stay on the bridge during the engagement. She understood why. She was there to think the way the Veil thought, to anticipate what 400 captains trained in Dominion doctrine would do when things started going wrong for them. Junho turned to Kiwon. "Open a broadcast channel," he said. "Wide frequency. I want everything that happens in the next hour recorded and transmitted to Earth Command in real time." Kiwon looked up briefly. "They'll see it too, the Veil and everyone else monitoring this sector." "I know," Junho said. She opened the channel without another word. He did not speak into it. He did not make a speech or issue a warning or give the Veil fleet any opportunity to prepare themselves for what was coming. The channel was not for them. It was for every other civilization watching on their sensors, every neutral species, every Dominion client state that had spent years pretending not to notice what the Dominion did to smaller peoples. He wanted them to see this, not the destruction, the method. He wanted them to understand exactly what humanity had spent 10,000 years building. "Kiwon," he said quietly, "first jump." The No More Civility dropped into FTL and came back out inside the Veil formation. Not at the edge, not at a safe approach distance. Inside, deep in the middle of the fleet, surrounded on every side, exactly where no ship was supposed to be able to go because every tactical model in existence said that micro-jumping into a dense formation was a guaranteed collision. The Veil had never done it. It had never occurred to them that anyone would. Wu Ho had spent 11 years making sure it was possible. He had run the simulation 4,216 times. He had the number memorized. He had never told anyone else the number because he thought it would worry them. The array fired the moment they dropped out of FTL. The cradle breaker did not fire like a beam or a missile. It fired like an idea, a specific, targeted disruption that hit a ship's own defensive systems and flipped them. Shields inverted. Point defense arrays turned inward. Power cores received signals from their own command systems telling them to do things power cores were never meant to do. The 3 Veil cruisers closest to the No More Civility did not explode dramatically. They simply stopped, all at once, every system simultaneously failing in a cascade that took about 4 seconds from start to finish. 4 seconds was a very short time. It was also, Junho had noted during the planning phase, exactly long enough. "Jump," he said. They were gone before the rest of the fleet could return fire. They reappeared 40 degrees off the fleet's port side. Salmon fired the secondary systems, resonance disruptors, and electromagnetic cascade mines, the latter of which Wu Ho had spent 3 weeks placing into small stealth drones that were now releasing them throughout the formation like seeds. The Veil fleet began to turn, all 400 ships trying to reorient toward a target that was no longer where it had been. "Jump!" They came back in from above the formation center. The array fired again, 3 more ships, then the jump, then back in from the rear. Salmon was running the secondary weapons constantly now, every pass seeding more mines into the formation, every disruption pulse adding to the accumulating chaos inside the Veil fleet as captains lost communication with each other, as ships moved to intercept and found nothing, as the carefully overlapping firing arcs that had looked so solid on the sensor grid began to fold into each other. The Veil started firing. Of course they did. They were trained soldiers and they were not cowards and they had 400 ships. But they were firing at a position the No More Civility had already left, and 2 of their own ships were now in that position, and the fleet's communication relay had been hit by a cascade mine 17 minutes into the engagement, and the orders being issued from the flagship were arriving late and partial and sometimes not at all. Rena watched the sensor data and spoke quietly to Junho. "The flagship is trying to break formation and reset. If they manage it, they'll stabilize." "How long?" 6 minutes, maybe less." "Key 1. "Already plotted," she said. They jumped directly in front of the flagship. The array charged in 3 seconds. Salmon fired in 4. The flagship's shields inverted, collapsed, and the vessel went dark and silent in a way that was somehow worse than an explosion, a thing that large going that quiet that fast. The eternal tide held together for 9 more minutes after that. Then the first ship broke from formation. Then 3 more. Then the edge of the fleet began to come apart the way a wall comes apart when the foundation is gone, not all at once, but steadily, piece by piece, each piece making the next one easier. When the last 69 ships jumped away, the No More Civility was sitting alone in the middle of what had been the greatest fleet the Veil Dominion had assembled in 300 years. The broadcast channel was still open. Junho let the silence run for a full minute. Then he said 2 words into it, simply and without drama, for whoever was listening across the sector. "We're done." He meant the battle. The Veil would spend a long time wondering if he meant something larger. The Veil Dominion had not fractured in 600 years. It fractured now. It did not happen loudly. There was no single moment, no declaration, no dramatic split that could be pointed to later as the thing that broke it. It happened the way old structures fail, quietly, from the inside, stress building in places no one had bothered to check because no one had ever imagined the load would be tested. The client species that had spent decades under Dominion protection began running their own calculations. The math had changed. The thing they had paid tribute to, deferred to, shaped their foreign policy around. That thing had just lost 331 warships to a single human vessel, and the 69 ships that made it back were not talking about regrouping. They were talking about what they had seen, and what they had seen had the particular quality of things that cannot be unseen. 3 client species submitted formal petitions for diplomatic independence within the first week. 2 more declared neutrality before the week was out. The Authority Collective, which had maintained a careful distance from both humanity and the Dominion for the better part of a century, sent a brief and politely worded message to Earth Command asking whether humanity was open to contact. The message was notable mostly for its tone, which was respectful in a way that messages to Earth had never quite been before. Inside the Dominion, Ambassador Rashin moved through corridors that had recently been full of easy confidence and were now full of something that no one wanted to name. He attended emergency sessions of the High Conclave, where the language used was still careful and formal, but the eyes of the people using it told a different story. He listened to military commanders explain, with great technical detail, how the engagement at Velshara had gone wrong, and he noticed that none of them used the word defeat. They said tactical reversal *. They said unexpected asymmetric engagement. They said systemic communication failure and navigational anomaly in enemy approach vectors. They used every word they could find except the honest one. He had written the livestock message himself. He remembered the ease with which he had written it, sitting at his desk, the words coming quickly, not even pausing to review the language before sending it. He thought about that now, in the sessions that ran past midnight, and he did not share the thought with anyone. On the 11th day after the battle, he formally requested an audience with Earth Command. Admiral Dehyun received the request, read it once, set it aside, and went back to work. On the second day she received a follow-up message, more urgent in tone. She set that aside too. On the 5th day she received a third message, and this one had a quality that was different from the others, something careful and strained underneath the formal language, the way a person sounds when they are trying very hard not to let you hear that they are afraid. She read it 3 times. Then she scheduled the meeting for 6 days later, at a time and location of her choosing, and sent back a confirmation with no additional words. Rashin arrived with 2 aides and a prepared statement that was 30 pages long. Dehyun arrived alone. She let him talk for a long time. He spoke about the historical context of Dominion-human relations. He spoke about miscommunication and cultural differences in how military actions were classified and understood. He spoke about a path forward, about cooperation, about the mutual benefits of a normalized relationship between their peoples. He spoke well. He had been doing this for 40 years, and he knew how to fill a room with words that moved in the right direction. Dehyun waited until he finished. Then she opened a single file on the display between them. She pressed play. Jeon's voice filled the room. It was the same flat, steady voice from the black box recording, unhurried, clear, reading names the way someone reads a list of things that matter enormously and must not be lost. Street by street, building by building, the schools, the hospital, the university with its second building that had been open for 2 months. She let it play for 3 minutes. The room was very quiet. One of Rashin's aides looked at the table, the other looked at the wall. Rashin himself looked at the display. And his face went through several things in those 3 minutes that his diplomatic training had never fully prepared him for. Dehyun stopped the recording. She looked at him for a moment without speaking. Then she said, in the same tone she might use to discuss a supply schedule, "The ship is still out there. I want you to understand that. It does not come home until we decide it does. You do not get to decide that. You do not get to decide anything about this. What you can do is listen." She slid a single document across the table. These are our terms. They are not negotiable. They are not a starting position. Read them, take them back, and do not send me another 30 pages. She stood up, picked up her things, and left. Roshin sat in the room for a while after she was gone. His aides did not speak. The document sat on the table between them, thin and plain and very final looking. Aboard the asterisk No More Civility, Junho received the diplomatic intercepts the same evening. He read them in his cabin alone, taking his time, going through each one carefully. When he was done, he went to the crew room, where Salmon and Kiwon and Wuho were sitting in the particular way people sit when they are tired in a deep place that sleep does not fully reach. Rena was reading at the end of the table. He told them what was happening, the fracturing of the Dominion, the petitions, the meeting with Roshin. He laid it out plainly, without embellishment, and let them sit with it. Wuho was quiet, which was unusual. He turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands and looked at the table. Salmon said nothing. She had her arms folded and her eyes on the wall, and her expression was the expression of someone doing arithmetic that does not come out to a satisfying number. It was Kiwon who spoke. She was the youngest of them, and she sometimes asked things the others had decided not to ask out loud, because she had not yet learned to leave certain questions alone. "Is it enough?" she said. 4.3 million people. Is any of this ever going to be enough? The room was quiet. Junho looked at her for a long moment. He thought about Jeon's voice on the recording. He thought about the 41 minutes. He thought about a university with a second building that had been open for 2 months. "No," he said, "it won't be. That's not what this was for." He did not look away from her. "Nothing we do brings them back. Nothing closes that number. What this was for, what all of it was for, is so that someone sitting in a room somewhere, planning something like Heaven, runs the calculation and stops. Not because it's wrong, because they're afraid of what comes next. We didn't do this for justice. We did it so there is never a 4.3 million and one." Kiwon looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded, very slowly, and looked back at the table. The room stayed quiet after that, but it was a different kind of quiet, not empty, not unresolved. The kind of quiet that settles over people when something large and heavy has been said out loud and acknowledged and set down. Outside, the stars moved slowly past the small window at the end of the crew room, cold and many and indifferent, the way stars always are. The ship held her course, steady and dark, waiting for the word that would finally let her go home. It was almost time. The word came on a Tuesday morning. It arrived in Junho's cabin as a single line of encrypted text from Admiral Dehyun, short enough to read in one breath. It said that the Dominion had signed. It said the terms had been accepted without modification. It said that Earth Command was satisfied for now, that what needed to be established had been established. And at the very end, after all the formal language, there were 2 plain words that were not part of any official message and were not recorded in any official log. "Come home." Junho sat with it for a while. He read it twice. Then he folded the display and got up and walked to the bridge, and he told Kiwon to plot a course back to Omega 9. She did not ask any questions. She pulled up the nav board and began working, and within a few minutes the No More Civility turned in the dark and pointed herself toward home for the first time since she had left. The voyage back took 9 days. They were quiet days, mostly. The crew moved through the ship in the unhurried way people move when the work is done, and the body has finally been given permission to be tired. Wuho spent most of it in engineering, running diagnostics and cataloging every system that had taken stress during the campaign, filling reports with the careful thoroughness of a man who loved his ship and wanted to know exactly what she had cost. Rena wrote. She had been keeping notes throughout the whole operation. Not a journal exactly, more a clinical record of things she had observed and wanted to think about more carefully later. She wrote for long stretches in her small cabin and came out for meals looking like someone who had been somewhere far away in her mind and was slowly making the trip back. Salmon slept. not the shallow, interrupted sleep of the weeks before and after heaven, when rest had been a thing she went through the motions of without ever really arriving at. Real sleep, long and deep and dark, the kind that leaves a person heavy and slow and blank in the morning in a way that is not unpleasant. She slept 10 hours on the first night, and 11 on the second, and on the third morning she came to the crew room for breakfast and sat down and ate a full meal, and looked out the window at the stars for a while without any particular expression on her face. It was the most ordinary she had looked since the day she came aboard. Kiwon navigated. She always had something to check, something to refine, small adjustments to make to their course that probably did not need to be made but gave her hands something useful to do. On the sixth night she stayed on the bridge long after her shift ended, sitting in the navigator's seat with the lights low, and the stars very bright through the forward window. Junho found her there when he came in for a late check. He did not ask her why she was still up. He sat down in the captain's chair, and they stayed there together in the quiet for a long time, not talking, just watching the stars move, and that was enough. Omega-9 appeared on the long-range sensors on the ninth morning. By the time they were close enough to see it properly, it was early evening, and the whole crew was on the bridge, not because anyone had asked them to be, but because it seemed like the right place to be at the end of something. Nobody said much. The docking bay opened to receive them, and Kiwon brought the ship in smooth and level, and set her down without a sound, the way she always did, with the quiet precision of someone who had always known exactly where things belonged. There were no crowds. There was no ceremony, no gathered press, no line of officers waiting at the bottom of the ramp with medals and speeches and cameras. There was just the dock, wide and gray and lit, with the flat industrial light of a working facility, and Admiral Dehyun standing alone at the base of the ramp with her hands at her sides. The crew came down one at a time. Dehyun shook each of their hands. She did not say much, a few words to each of them, quiet enough that no one else could hear. Whatever she said to Salmon made Salmon close her eyes briefly and nod. Whatever she said to Kiwon made the younger woman stand a little straighter. Woo-ho she held by the hand with both of hers for a moment longer than the others, and he looked at the floor and cleared his throat, and then made a small joke that made neither of them laugh, but both of them something close to it. Rena was the second to last. She and Dehyun spoke for a moment in low voices, and then Rena walked away into the facility with her bag over her shoulder and did not look back, which was exactly her way. Junho came last. He walked down the ramp slowly, not because he was reluctant, but because he was looking at the ship. He turned when he reached the bottom and looked back at her the way you look at something you want to remember accurately, not the idea of it, but the actual specific thing, with all its damage and its weight and its particular shape against the light. Her hull was marked in a dozen places, the armor plating scorched and dented from the campaign. She looked like what she was. She had not tried to be anything else. Dehyun stood beside him and looked at the ship with him for a moment. Then she reached into her jacket and took out a sealed envelope and held it out. He took it. On the front was a printed label identifying it as the official Earth Command after-action report for the operation, classified at the highest level, not to be opened for 50 years. Junho looked at the word asterisk proportional in the document title for a moment. A very small expression crossed his face, brief and private, and then it was gone. He tucked the envelope into his jacket and walked with Dehyun out of the docking bay without looking back again. On Kalos 7, construction began on a memorial. It took 6 years to build. It was a single column of white stone, tall enough to be seen from the edge of the settlement, set in the ground at the center of what had been the colony's main square. The names of the 4.3 million were carved into it, every single one, in letters small enough that reading the whole thing from top to bottom would take days. There was nothing else on the stone. No dates, no images, no official language from any government or military body. Just the names, one after another, carved deep and clean and permanent. At the base of the memorial, Sometime in the week before the official opening ceremony, someone placed a small metal plaque on the ground. It was plain and dark, and had no markings that identified who had made it or who had left it there. No camera recorded who set it down. No record existed of its installation. It was simply there one morning when the workers arrived, sitting flat against the stone base of the memorial as if it had always been there. It said, "They thought we would mourn quietly. The crew of NMC-001. Nobody ever claimed it. Nobody ever needed to." Far away, in the secured wing of Shipyard Omega-9, the No More Civility sat in her dry dock berth in the dark. She was never recommissioned. She was never officially listed on any public naval record. She simply stayed present, intact, waiting with the particular patience of something that has already done the thing it was made for and knows, without needing to be told, that the world is different because of it. And for a very long time after that, nobody came for humanity again.